Welcome back to the People's Basics, the home of the universal basics. We're here once again to do an episode of the People's Platform where we speak to people in the community like you about the issues that are most important to yourselves and the community's top issues of the universal basics. With us today, we're going to be talking to Logan Phillips. He is going to be talking with us a lot about the data around politics and how we, value polling. Why do we do it so much? What is the downsides and upsides of doing knowledge checks with these citizens of what they are thinking about races and different issues, as well as much more. But before we get into that, we want to remind you all to make sure that you are subscribed to the People's Basics so that you're notified of all of our content, as well as check the description section down below for our link to Linktree that has all of our community links. Without further ado, let's bring on Logan Phillips. Logan, hey, welcome to the People's Basics, man.
Hey, thanks a lot, John. Pleasure to be talking with you today.
Yeah. So, Logan, I always love to have our guests introduce themselves a little bit more to the community. Do you mind telling the folks out there where you're from, what you do, and how you politically identify?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be talking with all of you here today. I love political activists. I can tell, from following you for a while now that your viewers are engaged. That's what makes our democracy work. So cheers to all of you guys doing it and keep up the good work. So yeah, like you said, my name's Logan. I run Race to the White House, which breaks down a lot of data in politics. And I'm from Connecticut originally, DC these days. And I am on the Democrat side, even though I keep my site unbiased, I'm very much active outside of that. Kind of like halfway between, Barack Obama and Elizabeth Warren, I would say.
Okay. I can get that kind of vibe of where you're coming from. So, Logan, one of the things that, led us to be able to meet each other first was doing some of that data work you were describing around the New York City mayoral race. And I wanted to ask you, in your experience, what kind of drew you to wanting to be like a data analyst? What do you see as the real value in trying to take a more analytical approach to how politics works?
I think a lot of the bias came from, a lot of my interest came from being at Columbia. That's where I was in grad school recently. And I realized that my political circle became so much further to the left just by the very nature of that it was kind of messing with my political compass, right? And so that happens with all of us, right? We're all in our own political bubbles and we can get good analysis from the people that we talk to and doing our own like kind of mini focus groups. But, the way that society is today, there is a huge likelihood that you're missing a huge chunk of the picture, right? If you're around people that have college degrees or don't, if you're around people mostly of one race or one region, data helps cut through that. It's not perfect, as we certainly saw in 2020 and 2016, but it gives us a much better read of what the larger picture was. And I think that's why I started to get engaged, especially because, I was waiting for people like Nate Silver to tell us what's going to happen in the primary in 2020 and the general election. And they don't get involved until the last few months. So I decided to just see for myself and build a lot of the site and forecasts that I run now, starting off from that point.
Yeah, to that point about trying to get outside of our personal anecdotal view of how others kind of perceive the world, taking a more hopefully unbiased approach to being able to assess what others are thinking can provide a more holistic sense of what the populace might want. I wanted to ask you if there are any challenges that you've been identifying within the field, because I think there's been a lot more distrust or frustration with polling in recent decades with some of the surprises that we had in 2016 and onward. Can you describe some of the challenges that you're seeing with analyzing it? Do you think that polling is getting worse, or are there just kind of some statistical anomalies? What are you kind of seeing within the field right now?
Yeah, well, I think it's a roller coaster effect in part because it got ridiculously accurate, probably out of somewhat luck for a few cycles, especially when, Nate Silver became kind of the golden boy because he was just nailing race after race, got 149 out of 150 states right on the presidential. And then all of a sudden it became imperfect, and it always wasn't perfect, right? It tells you a range of what's most likely going to happen, but you're never going to know exactly because these pollsters are trying to figure out what's the voting base going to be like. And they do that by asking people how likely they turn out, but it's never going to be perfect, right? Especially as the electorate changes. Now, maybe they figured it out with Barack Obama in 2008 as the first black president, and the way he would communicate. It didn't take that much of a genius, especially after the primary turnout, to realize, okay, this is going to be a different electorate. But with Trump, it was a little harder to see. And it is definitely getting worse, right? Like, Part of it is in 2016, you had a much bigger change between education level for white college educated voters versus non-white college educated voters preferring Trump by much larger margins. And pollsters didn't really prioritize balancing that sample before. Because in 2012, it was almost split between Obama and Romney in terms of the difference between those two groups was much narrower, right? And then in 2020, it got way worse, right? Even though they put all this effort in fixing it. And you can all come up with our own reasons why. It's likely not one, but I think a big part of it was that Trump's coalition is based off of distrust in institutions. And he's kind of weird sometimes in the things that he emphasizes. We don't really have candidates talking about conspiracies about pollsters having some secret agenda. And so I think that got a lot of his viewers to just say, I'm not going to stand with these people that are trying to twist our system. They weren't answering. Another theory people have is that Democrats were home a lot more because of the coronavirus and were so eager because they hated Trump to answer phones in a way they otherwise never would have.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of hitting at one of the kind of things of how we have had a change in the electorate of polling is responsiveness to how do we reach out. So as you said, the main way we reach out in polling a lot is phone calls. We want to talk to the voters. And I think the way we've communicated as a society has largely shifted. More and more people are relying primary methods with a cell phone compared to landline methods. Response rates to just taking a random phone call because we have such accessibility to, phone number ID, basically, who's calling us. If it's a stranger, we're like, I'm not feeling that. It's dropped now to 6% response rate for just telephone calls. And so it changes how we can kind of get a sense of, is this just the people who are willing to answer? It's just such a small sample size. If 94% of people aren't taking that phone call, are you really reaching them all? And so they've definitely had to take a more blended approach. I wanted to ask you, how do you think we should be trying to reach people currently? Do you think we have to try these kind of all bases approach, online, phone, email, bringing them all in? What are kind of some of those gold standards that you look for when you're analyzing polls?
Usually what I look for in terms of it, right, because I do weigh polls, I look at pollsters' track record. And I think some of that comes down to your ability to adjust, because right now is the time for pollsters to take a lot more risks because they clearly weren't been getting it lately. And we're going to find out what works after this cycle, if pollsters are more willing to do that. And I think you will see some. But you definitely need online or to have that in a mix, especially in these poll averages, right? Because one poll is never going to tell you the full picture. They're even the best pollsters going to have some crazy ones that are going to be outliers. So you want to look at the average. But online polls are a really important part of that because, there's just like cell phone, when you're just calling people on landlines, you're going to reach people that are only using cell phones. Now you're just not going to reach some people, period, by using phones.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of how these polls are actually kind of organized, like when we have these quote unquote gold standards, we usually only recognize certain polling bodies. And a lot of the times, the way we kind of get these polls to be sponsored and financed is often you'll have media companies being the people who sponsor a lot of these polling efforts. Can you kind of describe to me some of the reasoning why these media companies feel they want to kind of put these out, and if it should be kind of decentralized, or do you think it should be held for certain organizations to be these key sponsors? Like, for instance, the Democratic Party set its criteria not on just who the pollsters were, but also on who the sponsors of those polls were. I'm curious if you think there's any specific reasoning for why some policies like that could be designed.
Yeah. So the reason these companies, these news companies will sponsor polls is because it gets clicks. And so they will be featured and linked to by sites all over the internet, which will get more people to give them attention. Plus, like the way Google works, right? The more people link to, the better your site does when it comes to getting searches, which means the more views you're going to get through that too, right? So it's a really good business model move. And then, when it came to the Democratic Party letting some organizations, if you're the Washington Post, you want to partner with a pollster for good record, because if you don't and they're wrong all the time, then that makes you look bad, right? And people view you as a highly credible source. And ironically, like Fox News actually has a really good pollster, for example. And so you'll see headlines like all the time where it's like, oh, Fox News has bad news for Trump. Like that must mean it's really bad. It's actually like a Democrat-leaning pollster, ironically. So that's why those headlines happen all the time for him. But, you know, some of the best polls, though, honestly, aren't the public ones. They're usually the campaign internal ones. And they still have merit when they're released, but we also have to be suspicious, right? Because they don't release the vast majority of the data they show. So they'll do it if it's a candidate that's expected to be trailing, when they end up being closer ahead, to show people, hey, this is a real race. You should donate to it. You should volunteer for it. You should get out to vote. But, you know, we still should look at those as some value, because those tend to have the best record, because like a media company is going to pay a lot less than a campaign where their whole entire focus is to win that election. So they tend to be the best in business.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I'm curious about is we definitely have this reliance of kind of, when it comes to like the horse race kind of aspect of narrative that media companies try to produce, kind of that polling indicator is how they kind of represent where the race is. But I also feel like it allows them to dictate certain narratives as well. It kind of becomes almost a reinforcing narrative where you stop looking at a candidate if you've heard that they're not polling well at a point. And it's kind of this almost reinforcing idea that you're not a serious contender, therefore I'm not going to listen to you and have the opportunity to make you a serious contender. I'm wondering, in your opinion, is there a certain time window that you think is reasonable to analyze within? Because we get these kind of polling from like years out, and it's like, is this even worth anything, or is this just like something to blow smoke?
Yeah, John, so you brought up some good points there. On the first part, I go back and forth on this a lot, especially because I feel, you know, if it isn't good, I'm a little bit complicit. That's what my site covers a lot of. I think overall it's a positive, but it certainly comes with cost, because to know that a candidate is in play, that a race is in play, helps activists know where to get engaged, right? We saw that last time, and, you know, Democrats got a little too excited sometimes about some of the races that weren't winnable. And it's always good to get involved, but if you're in another state, you really want to focus on the places where you can make the most difference. And we lost those competitive House seats where, you know, you got to think, if maybe they got one small share of the donors, that the Senate races that were completely out of play, we might be able to win those, right? So on that front, the polling data can be really valuable. But the last thing you want to have are people out of the race too early. Like, I would say focus on the general election polling when it comes to the primary really early on. Don't buy it too much. I mean, in Pennsylvania, right? No, actually, let's go to Illinois 2004. When Barack Obama, or maybe, no, I think it was 2006, when Barack Obama ran for the Senate, he probably would have started out in 8th place in that primary. Now, his political skills are off the charts, right? So he was going to move up those ranks as people got to know who he was. But he was just a state senator. He didn't have a national or state following at that point, long before he did his DNC big speech. Or no, I guess by the way, I apologize. My timeline is way off on here. We are talking about 2004, a long time ago in politics. So, but that's the point I'm trying to get across, is if you love someone at this stage and they're pulling way behind, especially if the big money hasn't and the establishment hasn't gotten behind the candidate, they can win, right? So like Erica Smith, I know that's someone you've endorsed. I can't tell you how strong her candidacy is going to be, but I know it's not over because no one's consolidated yet strongly around Jackson or Beasley. So that race is still certainly one that's in play.
Yeah, you know, it's definitely something to kind of balance out, because can be a reinforcing narrative. But as you said, I think it's a great point. You also need some sense of, where do you use resources? It's not like we have infinite resources to funnel into every single race. And so we do have to be somewhat judicious in how we, utilize them. So I definitely can agree with you there. I would ask, in your opinion, is there anything that we should be trying to do in the future when it comes to polling, so that we can kind of restore trust? Because I think, as we're talking about before, there's been this degradation in some of the polling methods. Do you think there's anything that we could do to kind of have the public trust it, or is it kind of healthy to have a somewhat of a natural skepticism? Because it's like, it can be differences in pollsters. It's not like every single pollster is the same, so you should have only certain people who can kind of say, okay, these are the highest standards, you should trust these kind of ones. Like, do you think that there's any like gatekeepership that's needed, or new paths forward that kind of need to be had for polling to be more reliable and trustworthy again, kind of?
Yeah, John, I think it's such a great question. Polling is going to get better and it's going to get worse. And my guess is it'll get a little bit better than it was before. But I think separate from that, the biggest change is probably more on the gatekeeper side, on the media side. We just need to talk about polls a little bit differently. They're not soothsayers. They're not perfect. What they are is a snapshot in time that is an imperfect snapshot of time of what the electorate thought last week. And that's going to change over time. So like you said, I don't know if this are your exact words, but healthy dose of skepticism is what you should always have when looking at, especially one poll, but even the polling average. This is a marker on the road of where things likely are, but it is a murky picture and it will be somewhere within that range. Now, if your candidate's down 20, it's probably not going to happen if it's a general election. If they're down by 5 or 6, it's going to be tough, but it's possible. They're down by 1 or 2, absolutely could be in play. That type of upset happens all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. It is, take it as a more fluid state of being. It's not like it's a pinpoint, you're going to get this exact number. It's usually within a range of confidence, and that's how you should view it. And that does mean sometimes you're going to have certain instances that are several standard deviations outside of that. But Logan, I wanted to just ask you, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the Universal people today as well? We always give the opportunity at the end. Do you have any questions for me that you wanted to hear answered?
Yeah, I'll start the question for you, John. So I'm sure you've been seeing the polling on UBI. There's been some huge gains, especially among Democrats. Where do you think it goes? This is a broad question, right? But where do you think it goes from here? You think the support there is strong enough now that if in a 2024, 2028 primary, a Democrat starts to you think you're going to see a Democrat nominee embrace that in a presidential election?
I think that's going to be very interesting. I think it largely is going to be dependent on whether or not we get Biden again. Like that's a whole question in itself. If Biden decides to run again, I think he's going to get the nomination. And I don't think Biden is a person that's going to be a UBI champion. I think he might be someone who's not going to be a veto on that. And you're going to see other candidates around the nation start to be more willing to run on that platform. But do I think that we're going to likely have a presidential nominee championing UBI in 2024? No. But do I see momentum and more candidates embracing it? Most certainly, yes. I think you're seeing a lot of progressives who didn't have UBI on the platform before now have it as almost a definite keep in of the platform. And I think you're starting to see even some more moderate figures be willing to embrace it. It's just the big thing that we're going to have to see is whether or not we get a UBI. I think more likely a lot of the Democratic Party has still embraced means testing. And I think we're going to see more likely cash relief style programs recurringly occur maybe in the 2025 and beyond kind of points. I think 2025 is probably the most aggressive timeline, but I think within the decade, very possibly.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked about this on the show, right? California doing means tested for pregnant women and for kids coming out of foster care that are 18 or 19 and need the extra support. And so maybe, Democrats are wonks. They like data, they like evidence. And so, if you see a Massachusetts, a California, New York do it and it works out, I think that might be the pathway as well. Get a track record of success. Also for voters too, right? Like we see this every time with ACA, a little bit of infrastructure now. Voters are so squeamish. They want big change, but they get scared of it at the same time. And if you can show them that it worked, they're going to be a lot less likely to be squeamish once you're near the finish line.
That's definitely true. And it goes even beyond the state models too. We've had a ton of local examples with the mayors for a guaranteed income. And I definitely agree with you. When we've seen so many of these different kind of movements of big advocacy, whether it was the LGBTQ fight for getting gay marriage legalized, that started at the local level. You have so many of these efforts come from these different states that are now doing legalization of marijuana. And that's eventually going to probably trickle on to the federal level. I think a lot of these ideas do need the kind of sample cases like this change isn't scary, it's helpful. And you kind of need to repeat that message over and over before people are like, oh, okay, maybe I'll check this out. Like if you keep building, it's like at some point it's hard to just like deny all of the evidence in front of your face. Some still will. Some will have different values and assert that it'll have other consequences that we're not studying properly or that these do not compare to the actual full implementation of some of the things that we are proposing, like a true UBI. We haven't had an actual universal model done as a pilot, but I do think that we are persuading a lot of people from the evidence that we are building up in these samples.
Yeah, I was won over honestly by how well the stimulus worked. I was a little on the fence. I was very much against it when I first heard it, and but good ideas, like you got to give them a second chance and be open to them. And there were just some amazing data showing how much food insecurity had plummeted after the cash relief every single time, and a lot of other indicators that were just so positive. That's like, okay, there's an argument to people being able to spend their money better than the government can, which is like kind of a twist of what we normally say when it comes to taxes, but it's true here too.
Yeah, for certain. A lot of the administration we've seen get tested during this pandemic as well. So the notion of we need to supplement income during this pandemic, as well as seeing the existing social infrastructure get tested, led a lot of people to be like, oh, maybe we should try and make this a little bit more simply and get it quickly into your hands and let you choose how to use it. I totally agree with you there. But Logan, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the Universal people today?
Yeah, I would love to, just to plug my site. So as I said before, I cover politics and break down the political battlefield and show you which Senate races are the most competitive. And I'm tracking the Virginia governor race. Last cycle, we were one of the most accurate in the country and did better with our Senate forecast than Nate Silver did. So if you want to check it out, it's Race to the White House. That's race to the WH.com. And if you forget that, just Google 2022 Senate predictions. We're first, second, or probably we're third on Google search ranks there. So you'll be able to find it then.
Very nice. Can we get a little prediction? What are we thinking in Virginia before we go?
Oh man, well, that's my whole sites thing. I know this is a cop out is to say that it's
Fine. We'll keep them going there. Okay.
I think McCall's going to win by a small margin. That's my guess. He's going to win by about 4%, I would say. But it's in play, man. So get out there and vote if you're in Virginia.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Logan, thank you so much for coming on today to the People's Platform.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, everyone. So that's been another episode here at the People's Platform at the People's Basics, the home of the Universal Basics. Before we go, we want to remind you all again, come join the movement. Make sure you're subscribed so that you get new content. Make sure that you've joined the network's organizing platform on Discord. We're trying to gear up for all these great candidates like Erica Smith, Charles Booker, and Alan Ellison, and we want to get you all involved. As well, please leave us a like so that you know how the algorithm gods work. We want to get boosted in those. Leaving a like helps a lot. Even a dislike helps, frankly, but we'd prefer you to leave a like. And then finally, we want to encourage you all to join and get a membership. We have all this premium content, behind the scenes content, as well as archive content, all for the simple price of $1 a month. So come join us and please support here, the home of the Universal Basics, the People's Basics. We'll see you all soon.